Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to MTG books, MTG lore, however you want to call it. I still don't really have a title for it for the series. Anyway, welcome back. We're doing chapter 12, and pretty exciting these last few chapters going forward. Anyway, let's get on into it. Will recovered his wits, while Rowan was still kneeling on the ground with her head in her hands. Cerise? He started toward the healer, who stared at him with wide eyes, unable to speak because of the leaf bound across her mouth. Rowan jumped up. Stay away from her, Will. Stay out of the hunter's range. He's not going to hurt us, said Will. He's the one with the big axe. But Will knew Rowan was often too swift in judging others. Her impetuousness could do more harm than good. The hunter was dangerous, certainly, but he'd not made a specifically hostile action toward Will. Offering respect was the best way to receive respect. He approached the man with slow steps, holding out both hands to show himself unarmed. Do you remember me? We walked together a short way, right outside Beckborough. We talked. I sang a few of my favorite tunes. He hummed the chorus of the Pluming Rose, and then fell silent, waiting. The man stared for so long, Will thought he was not going to reply, but at last, in a low, hoarse voice, he said, I remember you, Will Kenrith. Cerise stared at Will, waggling her eyebrows in silent communication that Will could not understand. Sopha stood beside the hunter with perfect calm. Whether ensorcelled or entrusting, it was impossible to say, but under the circumstances, Will was ready to take any risk if it meant they had a chance to escape the cage of thorns and go after their father. He edged forward until he stood within reach of the axe's bite, for the hunter to wield it. Without meeting the man's gaze directly, he spoke in his calmest tone. Your name isn't really Dog, is it? That's just what Oko calls you. Behind him, Cato said, Will, move aside. Will glanced back to see Hale gathering for an attack. No, Cato! Let me try persuasion. Before he could finish, the griffin inexplicably settled on the ground, folded his wings along his back, and lowered his head to rest on his forelegs as he gazed trustfully toward the hunter. With a startled oath, Cato dismounted and drew his sword. Wait! Repeated Will more sharply. Listen to me! He has made no move against us, only done what Oko commanded him to do. When Rowan and I first met him, months ago, Oko commanded him not to harm us, and he didn't. It's true, said Rowan in a low voice, backing him up as he expected her to do. I remember now. I was worried about walking anywhere near with him, so Oko specifically told him not to harm us too. I never heard Oko countermand the order. He hasn't done anything except what he's been specifically commanded to do. He's not Oko's willing companion. He's an unwilling servant. He deserves better than our hostility. Oko shook his head. I'm going to see if I can hack through the veins. If you do that, he'll have to stop you. Let me try it my way first. We'll turn back to face the hunter. You have a name, my friend. The hunter blinked, as at a slow measure of thought. At length, he said, I do not remember. May I unbind my friend Cerise? Will asked. I don't think the pain caused by the vines is anything you intend for her. The vines are under Oko's control, not yours. Unbinding her wrists doesn't mean she'll be free of the cage of thorns. It would just be a kindness. The hunter turned his gaze to examine Cerise's tear-streaked face and her raw red wrists. They hurt her, he agreed. Cut them off. Rowan got to her feet. Will, don't. She broke off. No, you're right. We have to act, or we won't save Father. Will slipped his knife from his sheath and carefully sliced away the vines binding Cerise's wrists. They withered as they fell to the soil. The leaf pasted across her mouth shriveled up and dissolved into dust, coating her chin. Cerise wiped the dirt and bits of leaf off her mouth with the back of a hand and spat, then gave Will a sudden, gratifying hug. What happened to you two? She demanded into his shoulder. He put his arms around her awkwardly, wishing he were bolder. What happened to you? Why didn't you follow us? I was following you. Or at least I thought I was. She released him and stepped back, glancing at the hunter as if expecting him to slam her into the dirt. The big man had not moved. Will said, We got sidetracked too. How did the hunter catch you? Couldn't Sophos have run him through like he did to that ogre? He has some kind of magic. When we blocked the trail, Sophos just went to him and wouldn't listen to me at all. If the lore mage were here, she might be able to explain it. Will scanned the interlace of vines overhead, but the eagle was long gone. At least, something of Elwyn still lived, unlike poor dead Titus. He's been cursed, said Cerise. I don't know why or how. Look at his veins, his face, his posture. He's clenched up the way people do when they are fighting constant pain. His blood, his flesh, and even his mind has been blighted with some manner of corruption. Without moving closer, Rowan said, Do you think Oko cursed him? Do you think Oko is a witch like Elwyn said? There is a shard of stone or crystal embedded in the flesh of his right shoulder, just beneath his neck, said Cerise. I wouldn't have gotten close enough to see it if he hadn't captured me. Do you see it, Will? The hunter still had not moved, nor did he object when Will sidestepped to examine the strange lump beneath his skin, although he was careful not to touch the big man. What do you think it is? He asked Cerise. As a healer, I'm learning to trace lines of health and disease in a body. The shard is connected to the corruption in his veins. It anchors it somehow. It might be the nexus of an evil enchantment. Could it be a witch's hex? I don't know much about hexes. Healers can't unbind them. Only a more powerful force can break them. Death, a true name spoken, a true lover's kiss, or an act of self-sacrifice. Will turned his attention to the hunter. Do you have a name, my friend? I have no name. No name you remember, I suppose? Did Orca curse you with his blight? His big hands clenched as he curled back his lips in a silent growl. I see darkness and a gleaming mask made of silver chains. Rowan had crept closer by slow stages. We know Oko is a powerful mage, shape-shifting. Vines grown into cages, making us forget we ever met him in Beckborough. Dog, did you see Oko turn the High King into a stag? The hunter lifted his gaze to face her, mouth turning down, and said nothing. Don't call him that, said Will. It's degrading. Abruptly, the hunter said, The stag was a man. Yes, he was a man at first. Cato said, Will, ask him who killed the steward and the clerk. People we knew were murdered in cold blood that night. Did you kill them? Will asked, already sure he knew the answer. Oko commanded me to kill the other two. Murderer, whispered Cato. Why did you do it? Will asked. I must obey him. Rage seethed in him. Now that Cerise had mentioned the curse, Will could not help but see the corruption in his flesh as the root of his fury. Why must you obey him? Will asked. The hunter rubbed his forehead as if that was all the answer he could give. But the gesture reminded Will of the headaches he'd suffered. He hides a secret he can't tell because of a magical binding like the one Oko put on Rowan and me, said Will. Cato shook his head. Well, we can't trust him, Will. He's a killer. A man who kills is a killer, is true. But if a person is coerced into acting in a way they would not otherwise act, who is more responsible, the coerced or the coercer? Do you want to risk our lives on such sophistries? Kado, look at the animals. They all four looked at the hunter, and how the unicorn waited patiently beside him, and how the fearsome griffin relaxed, staring trustingly at the hunter. By now, the three horses too had drifted over to stand near the big man. The beasts did not fear him, even though he looked so grim, his flesh streaked with dark veins of corruption, his eyes dull, and his stance wary. Yet a powerful aura emanated from beneath the smell of dirt, sweat, and grief, a sense of great power smothered beneath the corrosive veil. The animals trust him. If we free him from the binding, we can ask him to help us. You're being naive, Will. He's a creature of the wilds, a killer, not an ally. Will lifted his chin. Indralon refused this quest to you, Kado. The mirror gave the quest to Rowan and me. Kado's face grew red, but after a lengthy silence, he nodded reluctantly. Will gestured toward the sky, which was growing darker, and the glade where the shadows lengthened as afternoon slid toward the end of the short midwinter day. We don't have much time. From what you say, Cerise, it seems like Oko bound him and cursed him by anchoring that stone in his body. If we cut out the stone, we'll free him from the binding and the curse. Then he won't try to stop us when we hack our way out of the vines. Cerise, can you do it? If he'll let me, said Cerise. Will now stood a mere arm's length from the big man, well within range of the axe or the hunter's massive arms. He met his gaze, seeking the turmoil within. Will you let us remove the shard? Cerise can cut it out. We want to help you. You can trust her. You can trust us. What do you demand in exchange, Will Kenrith? The hunter growled. Help us find and free the stag, said Rowan instantly. Will hissed beneath his teeth as he shook his head at her. She would ruin everything if she wasn't willing to work with people, not just slam her way through problems. All right, she muttered peevishly. Composing his own expression, he turned back to the big man. We ask nothing in exchange. No one should be treated as you've been treated, my friend. Stripped of your name, of your memory, of your freedom. But I admit, we could use your help to get out of this cage and rescue our father. I won't lie about that. Anyone who can speak can lie. That's true, but I'm not lying. Not about our father. He's a good man, and a loyal ruler who works every day for the well-being of the realm. Everything I have ever needed to know, he and our mother taught me. The hunter's clenched hands relaxed. His gaze sparked, eyes lifting as toward a vision, or a memory only he could see. Father, he whispered. That's right. We lost our father when Oka turned him into a stag. We want to get him back, to save him from being hunted and killed. which is how Oko intends to start a war. A war! The hunter touched his own shoulder, flinched when his fingers brushed close to the inflamed skin. He told me to hide, so they wouldn't take me to fight their war, he said in a low voice. Oko told you to hide? Will asked. The hunter shook his head, jaw tight with anger, breathing hard. Not Oko. I don't remember. I want to remember. Will reached out until his hand rested a hair's breadth above the brawny forearm of the hunter. Let Cerise cut out the shard. If the spell is broken, then you can remember. For the longest time, the hunter studied Will. His gaze, a well those depths concealed the worst sort of terrors. Yet Will could not fear him. The animals did not fear him. Didn't that reveal something about the man? Probably he was being naive, as Cato said. Yet Will felt a sense of kinship between them he could not comprehend and yet clung to. He breathed evenly. His gaze met the hunter's without challenge or submission, as friends and comrades might acknowledge each other. At last, Rowan walked forward to stand next to Cerise. Will is right, she said in a soft, soothing tone. Our father and mother have spent their lives fighting for the realm and its virtues. What Oko did to you is wrong, despite whatever he claims in his flowery speeches. We will help you if we can, and if anyone can, Cerise can. The three waited, standing together as they had all their lives, missing only Titus, whose ashes now blew through the wilds, even into the air they breathed. The big man said nothing. Cato pursed his lips, but did not speak. The griffin closed its eyes drowsily. The horses lowered their heads to graze. Sophos stayed alert, head high, watching the humans with the glamour of a protective spirit born long ago out of the wildwood. The hunter set his axe on the ground. He knelt, bowing his head. Cerise rubbed the blistered skin of her wrists, then swallowed nervously. Will nodded at her, blushing a little as he always seemed doomed to do these days whenever he interacted with her. It had all seemed so much simpler when they were younger. Cerise paid him no mind as she opened her healer's pack. Magic alone cannot heal. She had deft hands, a keen eye, and a fierce aptitude for mending broken things. She licked her lips before moving to stand at the hunter's shoulder. He was so tall, she didn't have to lean over. I'm going to touch your shoulder. I'll be wearing my riding gloves so my skin won't touch your skin. That should protect me from the corruption in your flesh, and I hope it will make you more comfortable. Nod if you hear me and agree. Will held his breath. After a pause, the man nodded. Cerise placed the gloved hand on the man's skin to create connection and trust. The hunter flinched, but did not pull away. Rowan said, Let me help. She had taken up a station on the man's other side, so she, Will, and Cerise formed a triangle around him, standing on the other side of the griffin, using Hale's body to block his actions from the hunter's sight. Cato unsheathed his javelins from Hale's saddle and held them ready to throw. Working together, the three unbuckled the man's pauldrons and removed his stained and matted cloak. The veins in his skin had a disturbing color, not the pale bluish green of ordinary veins, but more of a black ichor, as if he had been caught midway through a transformation from a red-blooded human into something no longer human, leaving no life to fall into a new one that might be better or might be much, much worse. Cerise said, I'm going to dab wound ease oil to clean the skin where I intend to cut. This part won't hurt. Now do not fear pain, he said. No, I suppose you don't, said Rowan. With a glance at Will, she shook her head, and he couldn't tell if she was appalled at how his body seemed to be warping into a monstrous form, or admired the man's ability to withstand pain. Cerise probed around the hard lump bulging beneath the skin, wiped around and over it carefully, then brought out a scalpel and forceps. She made a dome with the fingers of her right hand steepled over the lump, and with a single confident cut sliced deep through the flesh. The hunter grunted, but otherwise made no sound. Will grabbed the scalpel to get it out of her way. She inserted the tips of the forceps, widened them, and with a firm movement tightened the forceps over the shard and yanked it free. The hunter did not move or let out even a gasp. Sweat budded on her face as she let out a long exhale. With narrowed eyes, she stared at the opaque shard in her hand. The stone, if it was a stone, absorbed light like a crater of darkness. "What is this?" she said, holding it up. The veins of the big man's arms began to visibly throb. Tendrils of black surged wildly beneath his skin, expanding their reach. He threw back his head and howled. They all slapped their hands over their ears. The horses bolted away from the fierce scream. The griffin woke, flailing in agony. The hunter leapt up. A backward spasm of his arm knocked Cerise off her feet. She flew backward to slam onto the ground with a yelp of pain. Rowan and Will scrambled out of reach, but instead of attacking them, the hunter staggered towards Cerise, who lay stunned on the ground. Sophos bolted to stand between him and the healer. The unicorn lowered his head, his protective instinct towards Cerise breaking whatever enchantment the hunter held over him. The two faced off in a battle of wills until slowly, horribly, the unicorn knelt on its front legs and pressed its horn to the dirt. With his attention fixed on the unicorn, the hunter lost control of the griffin. Hale rustled up with a squawk of agitation. Spreading his wings, he leaped at the hunter's back. The big man swung around. He was as fast as the griffin, ducking under the stab of its beak and grasping it by the throat. Yet he did not squeeze or tear. He twisted back and forth, as if at war with himself, an instinct to protect the beast struggling against the malevolent rage surging through his flesh. The black corruption slithered from his bare hands into Hale's flesh. With a cry of dismay, horrified at what he'd just done, the man released the beast and stumbled backward. He clawed at the air as if at 1,000 invisible demons swarming him. "Away! Away! Stop whispering! Leave me!" Hale bristled, feathers ruffling, and shrieked his hunting call. Shadows ripped through his form as the corruption took hold in his body. The griffin leaped for the nearest horse, Elowin's gelding, and smashed the animal sideways to the dirt. As the horse screamed, trying to get up, Hale raked open its belly with its talons and began to feed on its entrails. The other horses bolted for the far end of the glade, seeking any path to escape, but there was no escape from the cage of vines. They were trapped inside with the curse. Will could not figure out what to do. All his life, he'd had his father and mother to turn to. They'd solved everything. They were so good at what they did. Not just good, but peerless. Chosen by the questing beast as the best fitted to rule the realm. What was he? Nothing but their older son, unproved, unexperienced, inept, helpless when the worst actually happened. The big man swayed, pressing hands to his head as he stared at the dying horse and at the contaminated griffin as a miasma crawled through it. He lurched toward the griffin, wrapped his arms around its head, and said in a low, harsh voice, "Find peace, loyal beast." He broke Hale's neck with a single sharp snap. Cato cast the javelin at him, but he caught it and flung it back so hard it hit Cato in the head broadside and sent him tumbling. Rowan raced over to kneel beside Cerise. The healer's right leg was twisted under her, and she cradled her right arm against her chest, breathing in raging bursts. "Can you get up? Take my arm?" I can't. No. Think shoulder's broken? Maybe leg too?" Rowan stood, raising her sword. Sophos stood next to her, tail flicking nervously, horn glowing, but even the unicorn did not dare charge the hunter. Wild-eyed and panting, the man bared his teeth. In a choked voice he said,
Garruk! My father called me Garruk! Once I was a man who hunted monsters. Now, I am a monster.
Will placed himself between the hunter and Ceres, raising his hands, palms out. We meant no harm. We wanted to help you. We didn't know. But words were inadequate when faced with the harrowing curse within through the man's body.
You meant no harm,
Garruk muttered, crying out the words as if to feel how much truth they contained. He struggled, twitching as the corruption writhed through him.
But the other one, the Planeswalker.
What is a Planeswalker? Will asked, keeping his hands raised as if anything he could do would make the slightest bit of difference in the face of this terrible magic.
He called me a dog, but that leash is cut. Him I can hunt down and kill.
Staggering like a drunken soldier, he reeled toward the fence of vines. When he reached the bristling lacework, he pressed his hands against it. His touch withered the vines. As the thick stalks blackened and shriveled, he ripped them apart with a roar and bolted through the gap into the forested ruins beyond.